Elena Volkov never imagined that her childhood spent in Moscow would save her life in downtown Chicago. The 28-year-old translator worked for a small international business firm, helping American companies communicate with Russian clients. Her days were usually filled with boring contracts and business meetings. But on this particular Tuesday evening, everything changed. She had just finished a late meeting at the Millennium Hotel and was walking to the parking garage when she heard angry voices echoing from the shadows. Elena's Russian was perfect, thanks to her grandmother who had raised her for 10 years in Russia before she returned to America. The voices were speaking rapidly in Russian, and what she heard made her blood run cold. "He betrayed us, Victor," one man said harshly. "The shipment was supposed to arrive yesterday. Now the police are asking questions." "I know, Dmitri," another voice replied. "But killing him won't solve our problem. We need to find out who else knows about our operation." Elena pressed herself against a concrete pillar, her heart pounding. She recognized the accent immediately. These weren't just any Russians. These were men from the criminal underworld, the kind her grandmother had whispered about in fearful tones during those childhood years in Moscow. Through the gap between two cars, she could see three men in expensive suits surrounding a fourth man who was on his knees, bleeding from his nose. The man in the center was clearly the leader. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to cut through the dim garage lighting. This had to be Victor, and Elena could tell by the way the others deferred to him that he was someone very important and very dangerous. "Please," the kneeling man begged in accented English. "I can explain. The contact at the port, he got scared when he saw the federal agents. I had no choice but to abort the pickup." Victor's expression remained stone cold. "Fear is a luxury we cannot afford in this business, Alexei. You cost us $3 million and put our entire Chicago operation at risk." Elena knew she should run, should get as far away from this scene as possible. But her feet seemed frozen to the ground. She had read about the Russian Mafia in Chicago newspapers, but seeing them in person was terrifying and fascinating at the same time. The leader pulled out a gun and pointed it at the kneeling man's head. "You will tell us everything you know about the federal investigation, or your family in Brighton Beach will receive a very unpleasant visit." "No, please!" Alexei cried. "My daughter, she's only 16. She has nothing to do with this." That's when Elena made the biggest mistake of her life. Without thinking, she gasped audibly. The sound echoed through the garage like a gunshot. All four men turned toward her hiding spot immediately. Before she could move, two of them were already running in her direction. Elena tried to run, but her high heels betrayed her. She stumbled and fell, scraping her hands on the rough concrete. "What do we have here?" Victor's voice was calm but deadly as his men dragged Elena from behind the pillar. She found herself face to face with the most dangerous man in Chicago, possibly in all of America. "Please," she whispered in English. "I didn't see anything. I was just trying to get to my car." Victor studied her carefully, his cold blue eyes examining every detail of her appearance. "You were hiding behind that pillar for at least 5 minutes. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you saw nothing." One of his men, a stocky man with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. "Boss, we should just get rid of her. She's a witness." But Victor held up his hand. "Not so fast, Dmitri. Let's find out what our little spy knows first." He stepped closer to Elena, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the scent of cigarettes. "What's your name?" Elena's mind raced. She could lie, but something told her that this man would see through any deception immediately. "Elena," she whispered. "Elena what?" "Elena Morrison." She used her stepfather's name, hoping to hide her Russian heritage. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Morrison? That's not a Russian name." "I'm American," Elena said quickly. "I don't speak Russian." That's when Victor began speaking to her in rapid Russian, testing her. "You understand every word I'm saying, don't you? Your accent when you gasped was not American. You're Russian, or at least you lived in Russia for many years." Elena tried to maintain her innocent expression. but she could feel her composure cracking under his intense stare. "I think our little friend is lying to us," Victor said to his men, still speaking in Russian. "Should we teach her the price of dishonesty?" Without thinking, Elena responded in perfect Russian, "I'm not lying about my name. Morrison is my stepfather's name. But you're right, I lived in Moscow until I was 18. The garage fell completely silent. Victor's eyebrows rose in surprise, and his men exchanged glances. Elena immediately realized her fatal error. "Interesting," Victor said, a dangerous smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "So you do speak Russian?" "Fluently, in fact. Better than some of my own men." He circled around her slowly, like a predator examining its prey. "Tell me, Elena Morrison, what else are you lying about?" "Nothing," Elena said, switching back to English. "I work as a translator downtown. I help American businesses communicate with Russian companies." "That's all?" "A translator," Victor repeated thoughtfully. "How convenient. Dmitri, what are the odds that a Russian-speaking translator just happens to overhear our private conversation?" "Not good, boss," Dmitri replied. "Sounds like either the worst luck in the world or the best setup I've ever seen." Elena's heart sank as she realized they thought she was some kind of spy or undercover agent. "You're wrong," she pleaded. "I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I work for Morrison International Business Solutions. You can check." Victor pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Within minutes he had apparently verified her employment, but his expression remained suspicious. "Your story checks out," he said finally. "But that doesn't mean you're not working for someone else on the side." The FBI has been very creative in their recruitment methods lately. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. She was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. These men would never believe she was just an innocent bystander, and they certainly couldn't let her go knowing what she had heard. Victor seemed to make a decision. "Bring her to my office," he ordered his men. "We need to have a longer conversation." The black SUV moved through Chicago's streets like a shark through dark water. Elena sat between two of Victor's men, her hands shaking as she tried to process what was happening. The man called Dmitri kept glancing at her with obvious suspicion, while the other guard remained silent, occasionally speaking into his phone in Russian. Victor sat in the front passenger seat, making calls and giving orders. Elena caught fragments of conversation about moving shipments, changing meeting locations, and increasing security. It was clear that her accidental discovery had disrupted a major operation. "Where are you taking me?" Elena asked in English, hoping to remind them she was just an ordinary American citizen. Victor turned around to face her. "Somewhere we can talk privately without interruption." "You've created a significant problem for my organization, Elena Morrison. Whether you live to see tomorrow depends entirely on how convincing your answers are." The SUV pulled into an industrial district on the south side of Chicago. Abandoned warehouses and empty lots stretched in every direction. They stopped in front of a nondescript building with no signs or markings. The windows were covered with black paint, and the only door was made of heavy steel. Inside, the building had been completely renovated. What appeared to be a rundown warehouse from the outside was actually a sophisticated headquarters. Elena saw multiple offices, computer workstations, and rooms filled with expensive furniture. Several men in suits moved through the hallways, all of them armed. Victor's office was on the second floor, overlooking the main floor through one-way glass. The room was elegantly decorated with Russian artwork and expensive leather furniture. A massive oak desk dominated the space, and behind it hung a painting of the Moscow Kremlin. "Sit," Victor commanded, pointing to a chair across from his desk. Elena obeyed, acutely aware that armed guards were positioned at every exit. Victor poured himself a glass of vodka from a crystal decanter and studied Elena for several long minutes. "You know," he said finally, "in my line of work I've learned to read people very quickly. Their fear, their honesty, their intentions. It's a survival skill. What do you see when you look at me?" Elena asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "That's what puzzles me," Victor admitted. "You're terrified, which is appropriate given the circumstances. But you're not lying about being a translator. Your background check came back clean. No criminal record, no suspicious associations, no unexplained income. You appear to be exactly what you claim to be. Elena felt a small flicker of hope. Then you'll let me go? Victor's laugh was cold. I didn't say I believed you were innocent. I said you appear innocent. The best undercover agents always do. He leaned back in his chair. Tell me about your time in Moscow. Leave out nothing. For the next hour, Elena recounted her childhood. She explained how her father had died when she was 8, and her Russian grandmother had insisted on taking her to Moscow to learn about her heritage. She described the small apartment near Red Square, the strict schools, and the years of speaking only Russian with her grandmother. My grandmother, Natalia Volkova, she was very traditional, Elena explained. She believed American children were becoming too soft, too disconnected from their roots. She wanted me to understand what it meant to be Russian. Victor's expression changed when she mentioned her grandmother's name. Volkova? From which part of Moscow? The Arbat district. Why? Victor made another phone call, this time speaking very quietly in Russian. Elena couldn't make out all the words, but she heard her grandmother's name mentioned several times. When he hung up, Victor's entire demeanor had shifted. Your grandmother, Natalia Volkova, she worked as a secretary for the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the 1970s and 1980s. Yes, she told me about that. She was very proud of her service to her country. She also, Victor continued, provided information to American intelligence agencies during the final years of the Cold War. Elena's blood ran cold. That's impossible. My grandmother was a patriot. She would never betray Russia. Perhaps not Russia, Victor said carefully. But she might betray the Soviet system she had grown to hate. My sources tell me she helped several Russian families defect to the West in the late 1980s. She was never caught, but she was suspected. Elena felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. I don't understand what this has to do with anything. Don't you? Victor stood up and walked to the window overlooking his operation. The granddaughter of a known intelligence asset just happens to overhear a private conversation involving federal agents and port authorities. You expect me to believe this is coincidence? It is a coincidence, Elena insisted. My grandmother died 5 years ago. She never told me about any of this. Victor turned back to face her. Or perhaps she told you more than you're admitting. Perhaps she taught you more than just the Russian language during those years in Moscow. Elena felt trapped in an increasingly complex web of suspicion. Every truth she revealed seemed to make her situation worse rather than better. Look, she said desperately, I understand why you're suspicious. But I'm just a translator who works for boring business clients. I translate contracts for steel imports and software licensing agreements. I live in a tiny apartment in Lincoln Park and drive a 7-year-old Honda Civic. I'm nobody important. Victor's phone buzzed and he answered immediately. The conversation was brief and conducted in rapid Russian. When he hung up, his expression was grim. We have a problem, he announced. Federal agents have been asking questions about tonight's events. Someone reported gunshots in the hotel parking garage. Elena's heart raced. Maybe someone else heard what happened and called the police. Or maybe, Dmitri said from his position by the door. Our little translator here had backup we didn't know about. Victor held up his hand for silence. We need to find out exactly what the authorities know and how they know it. Elena, you're going to help us with that. How could I possibly help you? Elena asked. You're going home, Victor said. You're going to act like nothing happened tonight. If federal agents contact you, you're going to tell us immediately. You're also going to use your position as a translator to find out what American businesses might be helping the authorities. Investigate Russian operations in Chicago. Elena realized she was being recruited as an unwilling spy. And if I refuse? Victor's smile was ice cold. Your grandmother may have helped people disappear during the Cold War. I help people disappear in modern times. The difference is, the people I help disappear are never seen again. 2 guards escorted Elena back to the SUV as they drove through the empty streets toward her apartment. She tried to process everything that had happened. In the span of a few hours, her quiet life had been completely destroyed. She was now connected to the most dangerous criminal organization in Chicago, whether she wanted to be or not, but Victor had made one crucial mistake. He assumed that Elena's grandmother had never taught her about the intelligence world. The truth was far more complicated. Natalia Volkova had indeed shared many secrets with her granddaughter during those long Moscow winters, including how to survive when caught between opposing forces, how to gather information without being detected, and most importantly, how to play a much longer game than anyone expected. As the SUV dropped her off at her apartment building, Elena realized her real education was about to begin. Elena barely slept that night. Every sound in her apartment building made her jump. Every car that passed on the street below could contain Victor's men watching her. She sat by her window until dawn, thinking about her grandmother's stories, and trying to remember details that had seemed unimportant at the time. Natalia had told her many tales during those cold Moscow evenings, stories that young Elena had assumed were just exciting fiction. But now she realized they were lessons disguised as entertainment. Stories about people who survived impossible situations by being smarter than their enemies, by gathering information, by making allies in unexpected places. The key to survival, little Elena, her grandmother had said, is never to be exactly what people think you are. When morning came, Elena forced herself to go to work as if nothing had happened. Morrison International Business Solutions occupied a small office suite in downtown Chicago, where Elena worked with 3 other translators and 2 administrative staff. Her boss, Robert Morrison, was a kind man who had married her mother when Elena was in college. "You look tired," said Maria Santos, the Spanish translator who worked at the desk next to Elena's. "Are you feeling okay?" Elena managed a weak smile. "Just couldn't sleep. Too much coffee yesterday." She tried to focus on her work, translating a contract for a company that imported Russian steel products. But every time her phone buzzed with a message or email, her heart raced. She kept expecting federal agents to walk through the door or Victor's men to call with new demands. Around noon, her phone rang. The number was blocked. "Hello, Elena." Victor's voice was unmistakable. "I trust you slept well?" Elena stepped into an empty conference room and closed the door. "What do you want?" "I want you to be very careful about what you say right now. This call is being monitored, but not by my people. Do you understand?" Elena's blood ran cold. If federal agents were listening to their conversation, anything she said could be used against her later. But if she didn't cooperate with Victor, she might not live to face federal charges. "I understand," she said carefully. "Good. I need you to research something for me using your access to international business databases. I want to know which American companies have recently started or stopped doing business with Russian firms based in Brighton Beach, New York." Elena knew that Brighton Beach was the heart of the Russian immigrant community in New York and likely the center of Victor's East Coast operations. He was asking her to help identify potential informants or competitors. "That's not really the type of research my company does," Elena said. "Make it the type of research your company does," Victor replied coldly. "You have until tomorrow evening. We'll call you with instructions on how to deliver the information." The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone, realizing that she was now actively being drawn into Victor's criminal enterprise. But she also noticed something important about the call. Victor had warned her that federal agents were listening, which meant he either had sources inside law enforcement or sophisticated surveillance equipment of his own. That afternoon, Elena made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going straight home after work, she drove to the Chicago Public Library. She used one of their public computers to research federal laws regarding cooperation with criminal investigations. What she learned both terrified and encouraged her. If she was already under federal surveillance, it meant the authorities suspected her of criminal involvement. But it also meant they might be willing to protect her if she provided useful information. The key was making contact with the right people in the right way. Elena also used the library computer to research Viktor Kozlov, using the name she had heard in the garage. What she found shocked her. Victor was not just any Russian criminal. He was allegedly the head of one of the most sophisticated crime syndicates in North America, with operations spanning from Chicago to New York to Miami. He was suspected in dozens of murders, but had never been convicted of anything more serious than tax evasion. More importantly, according to several news articles, federal authorities have been trying to infiltrate his organization for over 5 years without success. Victor was known for his paranoia and his ability to identify and eliminate undercover agents. Elena realized she was in a unique position. Victor trusted her just enough to use her, but not enough to bring her fully into his inner circle. This might give her opportunities that traditional undercover agents could never have. When she got home that evening, Elena found a surprise waiting for her. Agent Sarah Chun of the FBI was sitting in the lobby of her apartment building, reading a newspaper. "Miss Morrison?" Agent Chun was a small Asian woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a professional manner. "I'd like to speak with you about an incident that occurred last night at the Millennium Hotel parking garage." Elena's heart pounded, but she tried to appear calm. "I don't know what you're talking about. We received reports of gunshots and found evidence of an altercation. Your car was in the garage at the time, according to the parking records." Elena realized she had no choice but to acknowledge being there. "I heard some loud noises, but I just got to my car and left as quickly as possible. I thought maybe someone was setting off firecrackers." Agent Chen studied Elena's face carefully. "Would you mind coming with me to answer a few more questions? It would really help our investigation." During the 20-minute ride to the federal building, Elena wrestled with an impossible decision. Should she tell Agent Chun everything and hope for federal protection? Or should she continue playing both sides and risk getting deeper into Victor's world? The FBI interview room was exactly what Elena expected from watching television shows. Gray walls, a metal table, 2 chairs, and a large mirror that was obviously one-way glass. Agent Chun was joined by Agent Michael Rodriguez, a tall man with graying hair who looked like he had been chasing criminals for decades. "Elena, Agent," Chun began, "we know more about last night than you might think. We've been investigating Viktor Kozlov's organization for a very long time. What we need to know is whether you were there by accident or design." Elena made her choice. "It was an accident." "But it's not anymore," she told them everything. The conversation she had overheard being captured by Victor's men, the intimidating meeting in his office, and the phone call demanding she research American companies working with Russian firms. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. "Elena, what you're describing makes you a victim of extortion and intimidation. We can offer you protection if you're willing to cooperate with our investigation." "What kind of cooperation?" Elena asked. "We want you to give Victor the information he's asking for," Agent Chun explained. "But we'll control what information you provide. We can use this opportunity to feed him false intelligence and track his responses." Elena felt like she was stepping off a cliff into darkness. "And if he finds out I'm working with you?" The two agents exchanged glances. "That's a risk," Agent Rodriguez admitted. "Viktor Kozlov doesn't leave loose ends. But Elena, you're already in danger whether you help us or not. At least this way, you have a chance to help bring down a very dangerous criminal organization." Elena thought about her grandmother's stories, about ordinary people who had found themselves in extraordinary circumstances and survived by being clever and brave. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. 3 days passed without any contact from Victor or the FBI. Elena went through the motions of her normal routine, translating contracts and attending meetings, but every moment felt like she was walking on thin ice. She noticed new faces in the coffee shop across from her office and cars that seemed to follow her home, but she couldn't tell if they belonged to Victor's surveillance team or federal agents providing protection. On Thursday morning, everything changed. Elena arrived at work to find Robert Morrison waiting in her office with a grim expression. "Elena, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "I received a very interesting phone call yesterday from someone claiming to represent a major Russian industrial company. They want to hire our firm for a long-term translation contract, but they specifically requested you." Elena's stomach dropped. "What company?" Baltic Steel Industries, Robert replied. Have you heard of them? Elena knew she hadn't worked with any company by that name, which meant this was almost certainly Victor making his next move. No, I don't think so. What did they want? They want you to relocate to their Chicago offices for 6 months to help them establish American business partnerships. They're offering triple your current salary and full relocation expenses. Elena realized this was Victor's way of bringing her completely under his control. If she accepted the position, she would be working directly for his organization with no way to contact federal authorities without being detected. I'm not interested in relocating, Elena said carefully. Robert looked surprised. Elena, this is an incredible opportunity. The money alone would change your life? Are you sure you want to turn it down? Before Elena could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Baltic Steel Industries. Elena Morrison, she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Good morning, Elena. Victor's voice was smooth and professional. I trust Robert has explained our generous offer. I wanted to speak with you personally about the position. Elena glanced at Robert, who was clearly impressed that the potential client was calling directly. Could I call you back in a few minutes? I'd like to discuss this privately. Of course, but Elena, I do hope you'll accept our offer. It would be very unfortunate if we had to look for alternative arrangements. The threat was subtle but clear. Elena hung up and turned to Robert. I need to think about this opportunity. Could you give me the rest of the day to consider it? After Robert left, Elena sat alone in her office trying to figure out her next move. She couldn't accept Victor's offer without putting herself in mortal danger, but refusing might be equally dangerous. More importantly, she had no way to contact Agent Chin without potentially exposing their relationship to Victor's surveillance. That's when Elena remembered something her grandmother had taught her. During their long talks in Moscow, Natalia had explained how intelligence operatives used dead drops to communicate when direct contact was too risky. They would leave messages in predetermined locations where their contacts could retrieve them safely. Elena spent her lunch break walking through Lincoln Park, the neighborhood where she lived. She tried to think like her grandmother would have, looking for locations that would allow secure communication. Finally, she settled on a plan. Elena had noticed that the same homeless man sat near the entrance to Lincoln Park Zoo every day with a small cardboard sign asking for donations. She had given him money several times over the past few months. This afternoon, instead of just dropping coins in his cup, she slipped him a $20 bill wrapped around a small note. Could you do me a favor? She asked quietly. If anyone asks if you've seen Elena from the apartment building on Clark Street, tell them I come here to feed the ducks at exactly 5:30 every evening. The man nodded and pocketed the money and note. Elena hoped that Agent Chun's people were still watching her and would notice the change in her routine. At exactly 5:30 that evening, Elena stood by the duck pond in Lincoln Park. She had been there for only a few minutes when a jogger stopped nearby to stretch and check her watch. Keep stretching and don't look at me directly, the woman said quietly. It was Agent Chun, disguised in running clothes with her hair pulled back and wearing sunglasses. Elena continued tossing breadcrumbs to the ducks while she spoke. Victor offered me a job with a company called Baltic Steel Industries. I think it's a front for his organization. We know, Agent Chun replied, continuing her stretching routine. We've been monitoring their communications since yesterday. Victor is planning something major, and he wants you inside his operation before he moves forward. What should I do? Accept the job, Agent Chun said. But we're going to modify the situation significantly. Tomorrow morning, Baltic Steel Industries is going to receive a visit from federal tax auditors. Nothing major? Just a routine inspection? That will require them to delay your start date by 2 weeks. Elena felt a chill despite the warm evening air. 2 weeks to do what? 2 weeks for us to identify Victor's law enforcement contact and neutralize that threat. 2 weeks to prepare you for deep undercover work in ways we couldn't before. And 2 weeks for Victor to get comfortable enough with the idea of bringing you into his operation that he doesn't suspect anything when you finally start. Agent Chun finished her stretching and prepared to continue her jog. Elena, what you're about to do is incredibly dangerous. If Victor discovers you're working with us, he won't hesitate to kill you. Are you sure you want to continue? Elena thought about her grandmother's stories about ordinary people who had risked everything to do the right thing. Yes, I'm sure. Good. Tomorrow morning, call Victor and tell him you're accepting the Baltic Steel position, but that federal tax auditors are delaying everything. Act frustrated about the bureaucratic complications. We'll handle the rest. Agent Chun jogged away, leaving Elena alone with the ducks and her racing thoughts. The next morning, Elena called Victor as instructed. His reaction to the news about the tax audit was exactly what Agent Chun had predicted. Typical American bureaucracy, Victor said with obvious irritation. These delays cost us money and momentum. How long will this audit take? They said approximately 2 weeks, Elena replied. I'm sorry, Victor. I know this complicates your plans. It's not your fault, Victor said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Use this time to prepare yourself for your new responsibilities. Study everything you can about international steel trading and American import regulations. Over the following 2 weeks, Elena's life became a carefully orchestrated performance. During the day, she continued her normal work while secretly meeting with federal agents who taught her surveillance techniques, communication protocols, and how to identify and document criminal activities without being detected. In the evenings, she researched steel trading and import regulations as Victor had requested, but she also studied everything she could find about Victor's organization and its known associates. The most important lesson Agent Chun taught her was how to think like her grandmother had during the Cold War. You're not just an informant, Agent Chun explained. You're an intelligence operative working deep cover in hostile territory. Everything you do, every conversation you have, every decision you make has to be calculated to maintain your cover while gathering the information we need. As the 2 weeks came to an end, Elena realized that her quiet life as a translator was over forever. Whatever happened next, she would never again be just an ordinary citizen caught in extraordinary circumstances. She was now a player in a dangerous game where the stakes were life and death, and the only way to survive was to be smarter and more careful than everyone around her. On Sunday evening, before her Monday start date with Baltic Steel Industries, Elena received a final message from Agent Chun. Remember everything we taught you. Trust no one completely. And never forget that your grandmother survived because she never stopped thinking 3 moves ahead. Elena deleted the message and prepared for the most dangerous phase of her new life. Maria wiped down the same table for the 3rd time, her hands shaking slightly as she watched the clock above the diner's entrance. The evening rush had died down, leaving only a handful of customers scattered across the worn vinyl booths. She had been working at Tony's diner for almost 2 years now, and she thought she knew every regular customer by heart. But tonight was different. The man in the corner booth hadn't touched his coffee in over an hour. He sat perfectly still, his dark eyes scanning the restaurant with the calculated precision of someone who had learned to notice everything. His expensive suit looked out of place among the truck drivers and late-night workers who usually filled the diner after midnight. Maria had served him countless times before, but she had never paid much attention until tonight. Vincent Marcelli was not just any customer. The whispers around the neighborhood painted him as one of the most feared men in the city. People spoke his name in hushed tones, crossing themselves when they thought no one was looking. He owned half the businesses on this side of town, and the other half paid him protection money. But tonight, Maria saw something different in his eyes, a weariness that she recognized all too well. She approached his table with the coffee pot, her heart pounding against her ribs. As she leaned over to refill his cup, she noticed the fresh bruise on his knuckles and the way he kept glancing toward the kitchen door. So something was wrong. She had developed an instinct for danger during her years working the night shift, and every fiber of her being was screaming that this man was in trouble. "More coffee, Mr. Marcelli?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. He looked up at her then, and for a moment she saw past the reputation and the expensive clothes. She saw a man who was trapped, just like she had been not so long ago. Vincent nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. There was something in his expression that made her pause, a silent plea that she almost missed. As she poured the coffee, she noticed his hand move almost imperceptibly, tapping 3 quick beats against the table. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Maria had seen that signal before. Her blood ran cold as recognition dawned on her. The 3 quick taps. It was the same signal her brother had taught her years ago when they were kids growing up in foster care. It meant danger was coming and you needed help but couldn't ask for it out loud. She had never expected to see it again, especially not from someone like Vincent. Marcelli, Maria's mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. This powerful man, this supposed criminal mastermind, was asking for her help using a childhood code that only someone who had lived through real fear would know. She glanced around the diner, suddenly aware of every shadow and every movement outside the windows. That's when she noticed them. 2 men sitting in a car across the street, their cigarettes glowing in the darkness. They had been there when her shift started, but she had assumed they were just waiting for someone. Now she realized they were watching the diner, watching Vincent. Their body language spoke of patience and purpose, the kind of men who were paid to wait and then act without hesitation. Vincent's eyes followed her gaze to the window, and she saw him tense almost imperceptibly. He knew about the men outside. He had probably known they were there all along. The question was why he was still sitting here, why he wasn't running or calling for backup. Unless he couldn't. Unless this was bigger than just a simple threat. Maria made her decision in that moment. She had spent too many years running from her own problems, too many nights lying awake wondering if she could have helped someone if she had just been brave enough to try. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Not tonight. She set the coffee pot down on his table and pulled out her order pad, pretending to write down his order while she actually scribbled a quick message. She tore off the paper and placed it next to his cup, her hand brushing his briefly as she did so. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, a recognition of shared understanding that transcended their different worlds. Vincent glanced down at the paper and read her hastily written words, "Kitchen door, 5 minutes, trust me." He looked up at her with surprise and something that might have been hope. For the first time since she had known him, Vincent Marcelli looked vulnerable, and Maria realized that tonight would change both of their lives forever. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the sudden silence, each second feeling like an eternity as Maria walked back to the counter. She could feel Vincent's eyes on her back, could sense the weight of the decision she had just made. Outside, the men in the car shifted slightly, and she knew that whatever was going to happen would happen soon. She began cleaning glasses behind the counter, her movements automatic as her mind worked furiously to figure out her next move. She had no idea what kind of danger Vincent was facing or why he couldn't handle it himself. All she knew was that someone had asked for help using a language she understood, and she couldn't ignore that plea. The kitchen door stood at the back of the diner, leading to a narrow alley that connected to a maze of side streets. It was the only exit that the men outside couldn't see from their position. If Vincent could make it there, he might have a chance. But first, she needed to create a distraction, something that would draw attention away from his movement toward the back of the restaurant. Maria took a deep breath and prepared to set a plan in motion that would either save Vincent Marcelli's life or get them both killed. Either way, there was no turning back now. Elena's first day at Baltic Steel Industries began in a downtown Chicago office building that looked completely legitimate. The 20th floor had been converted into a sophisticated business operation with conference rooms, computer workstations, and even a reception area with fresh flowers and expensive artwork. But Elena's trained eyes, sharpened by 2 weeks of federal training, noticed the subtle signs that this was not an ordinary business. The windows had been modified with special glass that would prevent electronic surveillance from outside. Several of the employees carried themselves like security personnel rather than office workers. And the computers she glimpsed had multiple encrypted communication programs running. Victor greeted Elena personally on her first morning, dressed in an impeccable business suit and playing the role of a successful international executive. "Welcome to Baltic Steel Industries," he said warmly, as if they had never met before in a dark parking garage. I'm confident you'll find our international operations both challenging and rewarding. Elena was introduced to her colleagues, a mix of legitimate business professionals and criminals who were clearly part of Viktor's organization. Her supervisor was Anya Petrov, a sharp-eyed Russian woman in her 40s who immediately tested Elena's knowledge of steel trading terminology and import regulations. Viktor tells me you have extensive experience with Russian business culture, Anya said during their first private meeting. That will be very valuable as we expand our American operations. Elena spent her first week learning the daily operations of what was actually a sophisticated money laundering and smuggling enterprise disguised as a steel trading company. Baltic Steel did conduct some legitimate business, but the real profits came from moving illegal merchandise and cash through carefully constructed networks of shell companies and corrupt officials. Elena's role was to translate communications between the Russian and American sides of the operation, but she quickly realized this gave her access to incredibly sensitive information. She learned about shipments arriving at various ports, payments being made to government inspectors, and plans for expanding operations into new cities. Most importantly, Elena discovered the identity of Viktor's law enforcement contact. During a meeting she was asked to translate, Viktor spoke with someone called Detective Murphy, who provided advance warning about federal investigations and raid schedules. Elena used the communication techniques Agent Chun had taught her to pass information to the FBI without being detected. She left coded messages in the bathroom of a nearby coffee shop and used specific phrases during her monthly checkups with her dentist that signaled she had new intelligence to report. 3 weeks into her employment with Baltic Steel, Viktor called Elena into his private office for what he described as a special assignment. "Elena, your work has been exceptional," Viktor said, offering her a seat across from his desk. "Your translations have helped us avoid several costly mistakes, and your knowledge of American business practices has been invaluable." "Thank you," Elena replied, though she felt a chill at his tone. "I have a particularly sensitive project that requires your skills," Viktor continued. "We've discovered that someone in our organization has been providing information to federal authorities. Someone with access to our most confidential operations." Elena's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "That's terrible. How can I help?" Viktor slid a folder across his desk. "I want you to translate these intercepted communications. They're recordings of phone conversations between our suspected informant and their federal contact." Elena opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were transcripts of conversations in English, along with audio files on a secure tablet. As she began reading, she realized with growing horror that these were records of communications between Agent Chun and an unknown informant, but the conversations weren't with Elena. They were with someone else inside Viktor's organization. Someone who had been providing information for months before Elena ever became involved. "Do you recognize the voice on the recordings?" Viktor asked, watching Elena's face carefully. Elena listened to several audio files, using her translation skills to analyze accents and speech patterns. The informant was clearly a native Russian speaker with excellent English, someone who had been in America for many years. The accent suggests someone from the Moscow region who has lived in the United States for at least a decade, Elena said carefully. The vocabulary choices indicate higher education, possibly in business or law. Viktor nodded approvingly. "Those details match our suspicions. We believe the informant is Sergei Volkov, our legal counsel. He's been with our organization for 8 years and has access to exactly the type of information that has been compromised." Elena realized she was being asked to help Viktor identify and eliminate the real FBI informant. If she succeeded, an innocent person would die. If she failed or refused, Viktor might discover her own role as an informant. "What do you want me to do?" Elena asked. "I want you to call Sergei into a meeting tomorrow morning," Viktor replied. "Tell him we need legal advice about a new shipping contract. During the meeting, I want you to listen carefully to his voice and confirm whether he matches the voice on these recordings." Elena spent that evening in agony, trying to figure out how to protect Sergei without exposing herself. She couldn't contact Agent Chun directly without risking detection, and she couldn't refuse Victor's request without raising suspicion. Finally, Elena remembered another lesson from her grandmother's stories. Sometimes the best way to protect one person was to give the enemy a different target, someone who was already planning to escape. The next morning, Elena arrived at Baltic Steel early and used her access to the secure communication systems to send a message to Sergei's personal phone. Meeting with Victor postponed. Federal raid planned for this afternoon. Get out now. When Victor arrived and asked her to call Sergei for the meeting, Elena tried his office phone and cell phone multiple times. He's not answering, Elena reported. Should I try again later? Victor's expression darkened. He made several phone calls in rapid Russian, growing more agitated with each conversation. Sergei hasn't been seen since yesterday evening, Victor announced grimly. His apartment is empty and his car is missing. Elena feigned surprise. You think he ran? I think our suspected informant just confirmed his guilt by disappearing, Victor replied. That afternoon, federal agents raided 3 Baltic Steel warehouses simultaneously, seizing millions of dollars in illegal merchandise and arresting dozens of Victor's associates. But Victor himself, along with his core leadership team, had vanished hours before the raids began. Elena found herself in federal custody, officially arrested along with other Baltic Steel employees but secretly debriefed by Agent Chun in a secure facility outside Chicago. You saved Sergei's life, Agent Chun told her. He's been our primary source inside Victor's organization for 2 years. When you warned him about the meeting, he followed emergency protocols and entered witness protection. What happens now? Elena asked. Victor is gone, but his organization isn't completely destroyed, Agent Chun explained. He'll try to rebuild, probably in a different city. You'll need to enter witness protection as well, at least until we can locate and arrest him. Elena thought about her quiet life as a translator, her small apartment in Lincoln Park, and her job at Morrison International Business Solutions. All of that was gone now, lost the moment she had gasped in a dark parking garage and spoken fluent Russian to a Mafia boss. But as Elena prepared for her new life in witness protection, she realized that her grandmother's real legacy wasn't the documents Victor had found in a Moscow safety deposit box. It was the courage to do the right thing even when the cost was enormous, and the intelligence to survive in a world where ordinary people sometimes found themselves in extraordinary circumstances. 6 months later, Elena received word that Victor Kozlov had been arrested in Miami while trying to establish new operations in Florida. The evidence gathered during her time with Baltic Steel Industries, combined with Sergei's testimony, was enough to ensure Victor would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Elena was free to build a new life, but she would never forget the lessons she had learned about family secrets, moral courage, and the price of justice. Sometimes the most important battles were fought not by soldiers or police officers, but by translators who understood that words had the power to save lives or destroy them. Her grandmother had been right. Survival often depended on never being exactly what people thought you were.